I'm Evan Mercer, 27 paralegal and only child, or at least I thought I was. It was the kind of courtroom you don't expect to feel personal in. Pale walls, water-stained ceiling tiles, a faint hum from the overhead fluorescent lighting. But I could feel every breath tightening in my chest. This wasn't my case. I wasn't the one standing trial. But I was here for the reading of my late grandfather's will, seated 2 rows from the front alone, unacknowledged while my parents sat beside my cousin Clara like she was theirs. They didn't save me a seat. I stood awkwardly in the aisle until a clerk gave me a look that said, "You can sit back there." And so I did, between a coat rack and a cracked window that led in the chair. From here, I could see everything but the long nowhere. When Judge Halverson entered, everyone stood. I did too, a beat too slow, hands jammed into the sleeves of a jacket I had outgrown. He took his seat with a practiced authority, scanning the room over reading glasses. "We're here to execute the last will and testament of Richard Abram Mercer," he began. My mother didn't look at me. My father didn't nod in my direction. No one called my name. No one asked if I had a statement, a question, a presence. I wasn't even given the courtesy of eye contact. Then came the moment that made me lean forward in disbelief. The primary residence at 413 East Willoughby Lane, known as the Mercer Estate, has been lawfully transferred per Mr. Mercer's updated testament to Evan James Mercer, biological grandson. The courtroom didn't gasp. It stood. My mother dropped her pen. Clara blinked at the floor like someone just read her diary aloud. My father clenched his jaw and looked at the judge as if willing him to correct a mistake. It wasn't a mistake. I stood, slowly. The back of my knees bumped the bench. It was like watching a mirror crack faces turning toward me, not in recognition, but in confusion. I'd never seen my name mean so little to so many people. A sharp, rehearsed voice interrupted the stillness. "Objection, on what grounds is this transfer legal?" It was my Uncle Robert, Clara's father, his voice rising with panic. "There's no proof that Evan was ever even adopted legally, let alone." Judge Halverson looked up calmly. I said, "Biological grandson." The word biological rang like a cracked bell. Someone muttered behind me, "Wait, he's not their son?" My mother, Donna Mercer, turned crimson. Her hands fluttered like she was swatting at invisible bees. "This is absurd. Evan doesn't even know what he's talking about. He's just here to cause trouble." I looked at her for the first time. Her eyes refused to meet mine. I wasn't just being ignored anymore. I was being erased. "If you've ever been through something like this," I whispered to myself more than anyone else, "drop a comment or let me know where you're watching from. Hit like or subscribe if family drama ever made you feel invisible too." And then the door in the back creaked open. A woman stepped in, dressed sharply in gray, hair tied back in a soft bun. She carried a leather folder with a hospital logo embossed in silver. Her shoes clacked against the floor with quiet finality. She handed the judge the folder and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Per Mr. Mercer's request before his passing, these are the certified birth records, DNA results, and notarized letters of acknowledgement confirming that Evan James Mercer is his direct biological descendant." The room went silent. Even the clerk stopped typing. The judge adjusted his glasses, flipped through the pages. "Well then," he said softly, "it appears Mr. Mercer wished to right a wrong, albeit posthumously. The documentation is sound." And that's when it happened. The shift. Dozens of eyes turned toward me, not with judgment this time, but with something rawer realization, a memory, maybe, a face they thought they understood, rewritten in real time. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. I saw my mother's mouth open as if to call my name, but no sound came out. And for the first time in my life, they all saw me. The judge dismissed the court a few minutes later, but no one moved. It was like everyone's feet had been nailed to the floor. The only sound was the rustling of papers and the slow, scraping slide of the leather folder being returned to the clerk's desk. My mother stood in place as if frozen, her expression caught somewhere between denial and panic. My father was the first to recover. He turned, walked straight up the aisle toward me, and hissed under his breath, "We need to talk. Now." I followed him out of the courtroom, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. I needed answers. My hands were shaking, and I didn't know if it was from anger or fear or the terrible grief that had been sitting just below my ribcage ever since my grandfather passed away. He led me down a narrow hallway and into a small, empty conference room. It smelled like coffee grounds and old paper. The blinds were drawn, and the walls were lined with faded diplomas and a dusty bookshelf that hadn't been touched in years. My mother slipped in last, shutting the door softly behind her. She didn't look at me. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. She turned her head slightly, still avoiding eye contact. "It was complicated." "That's not an answer," I said. "You lied to me. For 27 years. We raised you," my father snapped. "We gave you everything. You had no reason to dig around." "I wasn't digging," I said. "Grandpa gave it to me. All of it. And you," I turned to my mother. "You let me believe I was just unwanted, invisible. You let me sit at every Christmas and every birthday wondering why I never quite belonged." She finally looked up. Her eyes were red. "You were ours. We chose you." "Doesn't that matter?" I swallowed the lump forming in my throat. "Then why didn't you say that? Why did you pretend?" There was a long silence. My father leaned against the windowsill, arms crossed, jaw clenched. My mother sat down, her hands twisting together like she was trying to wring the truth out of her own fingers. "You were born to a girl named Cheryl Mackenzie," she said at last. "She was 17. Your grandfather. He knew her, helped her through the pregnancy, paid for the hospital. He never told us much about her, just that she didn't want to raise you, and he thought we could. So he gave me to you." I asked. My father answered, "Not exactly. He insisted, said you were family, but he never gave us details, never said how. He just made it happen, quietly." I leaned against the table and stared at them both. My heartbeat had slowed into something cold and mechanical. I felt like I was watching them from behind glass. "You never adopted me legally," I said. They didn't answer. "You just pretended." Still no answer. "So what was I?" Then I asked, voice rising. "Your secret. Your placeholder. Your charity case." "Don't say that," my mother said, her voice cracking. "You were never a secret." I laughed. It sounded hollow, like it belonged to someone else. "Really? Then why wasn't my name ever on anything? Not the house, not the family trust, not even the damn emergency contact forms. You never wanted anyone to know I was yours." My father turned to the bookshelf, avoiding me again. "We did what we thought was best." "No," I said. "You did what was easy." I left the room before they could respond. I didn't want to hear another version of the truth stretched to fit the shape of their guilt. Out in the hallway, Clara was standing by the exit, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. "So," she said, "you're the golden boy now." I looked at her, exhausted. "I didn't ask for any of this. Didn't stop you from taking the house," she said. "I didn't take it," I said. "He gave it to me. Maybe because he knew something none of you did. Or maybe," she said, stepping closer, "he just wanted to make a statement, burn everything down with his last breath." I walked past her without replying. There was no point. I didn't need to win anyone over. Not anymore. Outside, The courthouse steps were damp with rain. I stood under the overhang, watching cars crawl past, their headlights blurred by mist. The clouds were hanging low, thick and gray like wet cotton. I pulled out my phone. 10 missed calls from my mother. 3 texts from my father. Come home. We need to explain. Don't do anything rash. I sat on a nearby bench and let the phone fall beside me. It was strange. All my life, I had this feeling like I was borrowing space that didn't quite belong to me, even in my childhood bedroom, even at the dinner table. There was this sense of being slightly out of step, too quiet, too cautious, too other. Now I knew why. But the answer didn't bring peace. It brought questions. Who was Cheryl Mackenzie? Where was she now? Did she ever think of me? And why had my grandfather waited until death to say the only honest thing anyone ever said to me? I spent the rest of the day in the house I supposedly owned now. It was empty. Furniture draped in white sheets. The grandfather clock still worked, ticking steadily like a heart that refused to stop. I walked from room to room in silence, touching the edges of picture frames, tracing the lines of windows, as if I could hear my grandfather's voice echoing through the walls. In his study, I found the letter. It was folded inside a first edition book of legal philosophy. My name scrawled across the envelope in his familiar hand. Evan. If you're reading this, then the truth has reached you. I knew I couldn't undo what they did not completely. But I could at least give you something of your own. This house is yours. You deserve more than shadows and silence. You always did. Love. Grandpa. I sat in his chair and cried, quiet, shoulder-shaking tears that no one would hear. No one would judge. It was the first time I felt like anything belonged to me, and it wasn't just the house. It was the truth. That night, I didn't return any calls. I didn't respond to any messages. I just sat in the room where he used to write, with the desk lamp on and the storm outside, and for once, I didn't feel like a visitor in my own life. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight streaming in through the old stained glass window on the staircase landing. I had forgotten how much light this house could hold. Dust motes floated in the air like tiny ghosts, catching gold and orange beams that painted the hardwood floors in patches. I had fallen asleep in my grandfather's chair. My back ached. My mouth was dry. And for a split second, I forgot where I was until I saw the letter again, lying open on the desk. It hadn't been a dream. The house was mine. The truth was out. And nothing would ever go back to the way it was. I made coffee with the old percolator I found in the kitchen cabinet. Everything was exactly where it had been when I was a kid, the chipped mug with the red cardinal, the tiny jar of nutmeg my grandfather used once a year, the linen towel he folded over the sink handle. It was eerie, how untouched it all felt. And yet, I was seeing it for the first time, by 9 a.m. I heard the first knock on the door. I didn't answer it. Then came another, this one louder, more impatient. I stayed where I was, barefoot on the kitchen tile, sipping coffee and staring out at the backyard. On the third knock, I got up. I wasn't afraid, I was just bracing. When I opened the door, it was my mother. She looked like she hadn't slept. Her lipstick was smudged, and her hair was still pinned up the way she wore it in court, but looser now, like she had come undone in the hours between. She didn't say hello, didn't smile. She just stood there, holding a manila envelope. "Can I come in?" she asked. I stepped aside. She walked into the foyer, eyes scanning everything as if seeing it with new rules, as if the ground under her had shifted, and now she was walking in my house. That thought made something sharp twist in my stomach. She set the envelope down on the entry table, beside an old glass bowl filled with dried lavender. "These are the papers," she said. All of them. Every file we have. From the hospital, the lawyer, Grandpa's notes, everything. I didn't move toward it. Why now? She sat down on the wooden bench beneath the staircase, like a guest waiting to be called in. Because you deserve the truth, even if it hurts. I think I've had enough hurt, I said. Her eyes softened. Evan, I know this isn't what you wanted. We never meant for it to come out like this. Your grandfather, he forced our hand. No, I corrected. He freed it. She blinked. For years, I thought it was me. I continued. Thought maybe I was too quiet, too sensitive, too disappointing. But it wasn't me. It was you. You were hiding something so big, so foundational, and every time I got close to it, you pulled back. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. You were our son? She whispered. But I wasn't yours. I said. The silence between us was heavy. I wanted to scream, to cry, to curl up and disappear, but I also wanted to understand. I wanted the story, the whole damn story. She handed me another folded paper from her purse. Her name was Cheryl Mackenzie. You were born on a rainy Tuesday. We drove out to see you that night. I held you while your birth mother signed the release forms. She didn't cry. She just looked at you and said, "He needs a quiet kind of love." I never forgot that. I opened the paper. It was a photo, black and white, faded. A young woman with large eyes, holding a baby wrapped in a hospital blanket. The name tag on her wrist read, Mackenzie, Cheryl. That was me in her arms. I didn't recognize her face, but something in the way she held me, the curve of her hand behind my neck, felt familiar, like an echo I'd carried all my life. Where is she now? I asked. I don't know. My mother said. We lost touch. Your grandfather might have stayed in contact, but he never told us. I nodded, still staring at the photo. I'm sorry we didn't tell you, she said. We were scared. Scared we'd lose you. Scared you'd want to leave us. Scared that if we admitted you weren't biologically ours, it would make the love we gave you mean less. But love doesn't work like that, I said, finally looking up. No, she said. It doesn't. We sat in silence for a few more minutes. The house creaked around us, its old bones settling into a new reality. When she left, she touched my arm. Not like a mother, like a woman begging a man to remember her softest intentions. I didn't stop her. I spent the afternoon going through the files, page after page, letters, receipts, even postcards from Cheryl, brief notes, always addressed to RAM, never signed, never expressive. But they were there. She hadn't vanished. She had just stayed away. And then I found something unexpected. A short note from my grandfather, dated 6 months before his death. Evan, I asked them to tell you. They refused. I gave them time. They used it to pretend. So I've put everything in place. You'll find the house keys, the title, and the truth. I know I won't live to see your face when you read this, but I hope just once you'll look in the mirror and know you were never a mistake. Not to me. Not for a second. Grandpa, I wept again. But this time, the grief was different. It was gratitude wrapped in sorrow. That evening, I called the law firm listed on the bottom of the adoption agreement. It was still active. The receptionist connected me to an archivist who agreed to search for anything under the name Cheryl Mackenzie. 2 days later, I got a call back. We have a file, the woman said. It's small, but it includes a forwarding address, last known location, somewhere in Oregon. My hands trembled. Can you email it to me? Already on its way, she said. The file arrived 10 minutes later. There it was, a small town called Ashbrook, population 3,100, a P.O. box, and a name written in cursive: Cheryl Mackenzie Taylor. She had gotten married, or changed her name, or both. I printed the page and held it in my hand like it might dissolve if I blinked. I didn't know if I was ready to contact her, but I knew I needed to. I stood at the front window and looked out at the street. The sky was turning violet, the first stars starting to flicker through the twilight haze. Behind me, the house stood still, but inside, everything was changing. I wasn't a secret anymore. I wasn't invisible. I was someone's son, and maybe still someone's hope. I didn't call the number right away. I saved it in my phone as possible mom, a joke I didn't even find funny, just a label to make it less terrifying. That night, I slept in my old room. The wallpaper was still pale blue with faint sailboats. The kind Grandpa once said reminded him of his Navy days. The bed creaked just the same, and the ceiling fan made that rhythmic click it always had when it rotated. Everything was frozen in time, like the room had been waiting for me. But now, I knew it hadn't been mine, not in the way I'd believed. I lay awake, the sheet pulled up to my chin, phone on my chest. I read the name again. Cheryl Mackenzie Taylor, the forwarding address in Oregon, and then the note scribbled in Grandpa's handwriting on a yellow sticky, stuck to the back of the court copy. You'll know when you're ready. I wasn't. But I did it anyway. I typed out the message 5 times before settling on the 6th hi. My name is Evan Mercer. I believe you might be my biological mother. I was adopted privately in 1997. I don't mean to intrude. I just want to know the truth. I stared at the blinking cursor. Then I hit send. And then I threw the phone on the floor and stared at the ceiling for the rest of the night. The reply came the next morning at 6:12 a.m. Yes. I've been waiting for this. That was all. I sat up so fast I nearly knocked over the lamp. I reread it at least 20 times, waiting for more, waiting for follow-up, an explanation, a burst of emotion. But that was it. Yes. I've been waiting for this. It made my throat close. Not because it was cold, but because it wasn't. It was quiet, undramatic. Like she'd carried that answer around for years, just waiting for me to ask the question. I texted back, "Can we talk? I have questions. I'm not angry. I just need to understand." She called within minutes. I nearly let it ring out, but I didn't. "Hello." Her voice was soft, older than I expected. It had a tremor that didn't sound nervous, just worn. "Evan," she said. "Yes." A silence fell, but not the awkward kind. It was the kind where someone on the other end is catching their breath because the world just tilted. "I used to say your name out loud," she said, when no one was around, just so I wouldn't forget how it sounded. My eyes stung instantly. "I don't know where to begin," I admitted. "You don't have to," she said. "You just have to ask what you want to ask." So I did. For an hour. I sat on the floor of my childhood room and listened to the woman who gave birth to me tell her story. She had been 17, living with her aunt in a trailer outside Knoxville. Her parents were gone, one dead, the other strung out. She met a man, older, kind, but reckless. He was gone by the time she found out she was pregnant. She didn't tell him, didn't tell anyone but one person. My English teacher. She said, "He knew your grandfather, said he might help." So she wrote a letter. Grandpa drove 3 hours to meet her in a diner off the highway. He bought her pie, listened to everything, then said, "If you want to keep the baby, I'll help. If you don't, I'll still help." She cried right there at the table. "I told him I wanted to give you a better life," she said, and I knew I couldn't provide it. He didn't force her. He didn't guilt her. He asked her what she needed. And she said one thing. I want to know he's safe. Not rich. Not lucky. Just safe. Grandpa promised. And apparently, he kept that promise, even if the rest of the family didn't. I used to get letters once a year, she said. Updates. Not from your parents, from him. He'd say things like, Evan climbed a tree today and didn't fall. Or, Evan built a snowman bigger than he is. Little things. I lived on those. I asked her why she never contacted me. She paused. Because the deal was clear. No interference. No disruption. Your parents didn't want you to know. And part of me respected that. But mostly, I was afraid. Afraid of what that you'd hate me, she said. That you'd think I threw you away. I don't, I said, surprising myself with how quickly it came out. She was crying softly now. I could hear the tissue rustling on her end. I imagined her on a couch, maybe near a window, a mug of tea growing cold. Years of silence pressed into her shoulders. I don't hate you, I said again. We spoke for a long time after that about nothing and everything. Favorite colors. The fact that I liked pineapple on pizza. How she was now a librarian in Ashbrook. That she had a dog named Scout. That she never married again after the Taylor in her name. That some losses are just permanent. When the call ended, I sat there in stillness, holding the phone like it was a compass. Later that day, I told my parents I'd spoken to her. My father stiffened immediately. You should have told us first. Why, I asked. You never told me anything. My mother looked tired, but she didn't argue. I want to meet her, I said. In person. Evan, my father warned. That's dangerous. You don't know who she really is. She's my mother, I said calmly. You of all people should know how much power that word holds. They had nothing left to say after that. 2 weeks later, I flew to Oregon. She met me at the airport. No drama, no signs. Just a woman with streaks of gray in her dark hair, wearing a navy cardigan and holding a daisy in one hand. You said it was your favorite flower. She smiled. We went to a small cafe, talked for hours, laughed. She told me how she always hated bananas but pretended to love them when she was pregnant. She said maybe that's why I still can't stand the smell. I told her how Grandpa used to let me hammer nails into scraps of wood just to make me feel strong. She teared up when I told her I still had the little red toolbox he gave me. You were loved, she whispered. I can feel it. That night, she showed me a shoebox under her bed. Inside were clippings, photocopies, old photos she managed to find online, my face at age 6 on a school website, a mention of me in a local paper's spelling bee article, the letter Grandpa wrote when I turned 12. He's getting quieter, thoughtful. I think he feels things deeply. I had no idea anyone had been watching me from afar. I stayed for 3 days. We didn't talk about the past too much. It wasn't necessary. The silence had already done its damage. Now, we just let the present stretch between us like a second chance. When I left, she hugged me like she'd done it 1,000 times. And maybe, in her mind, she had. You'll come back? She asked. I will. And I meant it. On the flight home, I looked out the window at the clouds and thought about how strange it is the way truth can feel like loss and gain at the same time. I had lost the illusion of my childhood, but I had gained the roots of my story, and I was finally ready to keep growing. When I landed back home, the sky was the color of old steel flat, cold, and indecisive. I stepped out of the airport with a carry-on bag slung over one shoulder and a head full of tangled thoughts. My grandfather's house, my house now felt like the only place I could breathe. So I went straight there. As I unlocked the door and stepped inside, a strange quiet greeted me, not empty, Not lonely, just still. The kind of stillness that felt earned, like a silence after something has been spoken aloud that was held in too long. I dropped my bag by the door and went straight to the study. The photo of Cheryl was still where I'd left it, tucked into the corner of Grandpa's desk under the glass. I looked at it for a long time before tracing my fingers along the edge. Something had shifted in me since the trip, something permanent. I didn't feel like a stranger anymore. I felt stitched. And yet, there was unfinished business. The house, the will, my parents. For the first time in my life, I was the legal owner of something that mattered, and the strange thing was, it made people see me differently. I had barely been home a day when the calls started again. Voicemails from cousins I hadn't heard from in years. An invitation to Sunday brunch from Aunt Linda, who once forgot my birthday 3 years in a row. Even Clara called. I let them all go to voicemail. Then came the letter, hand-delivered. Thick, cream-colored envelope. Formal script. Notice of formal objection to property transfer. I stood on the porch, reading it while the wind tugged at my sleeves. Inside, Clara and her father were challenging the will, claiming undue influence, suggesting fraud, pointing to the fact that I had never been formally adopted. Never mind the DNA test, never mind the notarized letter, never mind the fact that Grandpa had chosen me. They wanted the house, not because they loved it, but because they couldn't stand that it wasn't theirs. I took the letter inside and set it on the kitchen table. For a moment, I just stared at it. Then I picked up the phone and called someone I hadn't spoken to since my internship ended last year. Carla Jennings. She was sharp, practical, and had a reputation for defending people whose families tried to erase them. I'd seen her dismantle entire inheritance disputes with a calm that was almost surgical. She picked up on the second ring. "Evan Mercer," she said. "Didn't expect to hear from you." "Hey, Carla," I said. "I need some help. Talk to me." I laid it all out. The will, the challenge, the bloodline, the truth. When I finished, she let out a long breath. "Jesus," she said. "They're going to try and bury you in paperwork, but they're late. If the judge already approved the transfer, they're running uphill. Can you represent me?" She didn't even pause. "Absolutely." We met the next day at a downtown cafe. She wore the same gray blazer she always did in court. The one with the tiny coffee stain on the cuff no one dared point out. She flipped through the letter Clara had delivered, eyes scanning fast. "Classic emotional language," she said. "All posture, no substance. I don't want a war." I told her, "I just want to keep what was given to me." "You don't have to want a war," she said. "They already started it." I nodded. "They're counting on your hesitation," she added. "People like this, they push, then call you dramatic when you finally push back." I looked down at my coffee, steam curling into the air. I didn't even ask for the house. I said, "That doesn't mean you don't deserve it," she replied. The hearing was set for 3 weeks later. In the meantime, I tried to keep my life normal. I went back to work part-time, took walks through the neighborhood where I grew up. But everywhere I turned, I could feel the shift how people looked at me longer, asked more questions, whispered just a little too loudly. The quiet kid with no real family had turned out to be the heir, and that made them uncomfortable. My parents didn't speak to me much during that time. They sent texts checking in, small talk, but they didn't mention the house. Not once. It felt like we were circling each other, afraid of what a real conversation might ignite. And then one night, my father showed up. No warning. Just a knock at the door around 9:30 p.m. I opened it to find him standing there in a coat too thin for the weather, holding a 6-pack of the craft beer he used to keep in the garage fridge. "I thought we could talk," he said. I let him in. He sat at the kitchen table and looked around like he was cataloging every memory he had left in this house. "This place smells the same," he said, "like lemon polish and old books." I waited. He opened one of the beers and took a sip. "You know, I didn't expect it to hit me this hard. Losing the house. Losing him." I raised an eyebrow. "You didn't lose him. You just lost the version of him you wanted." He looked at me, then really looked. I didn't know he was still writing to her. He said, "Your birth mother." I didn't say anything. I thought we had an agreement. A closed loop. But I guess he didn't trust us to keep it closed forever. "Maybe he shouldn't have," I said. He nodded. Slowly. "You're angry. I get that." "No, you don't," I said, leaning forward. I was alone in this house for 27 years and didn't know why. I always thought it was my fault, that something in me made you keep your distance. But now I know it was never about me. It was about the lie. He looked away. "I loved you," he said. "Still do." I swallowed hard. "I know," I said. "But you loved me quietly, like a secret." He didn't argue. Before he left, he stood in the foyer for a long time. "Are you going to fight them?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Because this isn't just about a house. It's about not disappearing anymore." He nodded. "Good." Then he opened the door, stepped into the cold, and walked away. 3 days before the hearing, Carla sent me an email with one line. "They tried to file a motion to invalidate the will. It was denied. We're on solid ground." I sat at Grandpa's desk that night, lit a candle, and read his letter again. "You'll find the house keys, the title, and the truth." He hadn't just given me a home, he'd given me a voice, one that couldn't be stolen, rewritten, or boxed away in family silence. And this time, I was going to use it. The courthouse looked different the second time around. Less like a place where truth was uncovered, and more like a stage where everyone rehearsed their performances, some sincere, some slick with pretense. I stood outside for a long moment before going in, the weight of my grandfather's name on my shoulders like armor. Carla met me at the entrance, clipboard in hand, lips pressed into a confident, polite smile. "You ready?" she asked. I nodded. As I'll ever be. The hearing wasn't a trial. Not yet. It was a formal challenge to the legitimacy of the will specifically. Whether my grandfather had the mental capacity and legal standing to give the house to me. Clara and her father, Robert, were arguing that Grandpa was confused in his final months and that the transfer had been manipulated by a party with emotional leverage. That party, of course, was me. We walked into the room, and there they were, Robert in his neatly tailored blazer, Clara beside him in a charcoal dress, arms folded tightly across her chest. Neither looked at me as I entered. "Not that I expected them to," Carla whispered. "Let them underestimate you. Stay still, speak plain, and keep your eyes on the judge." The room filled quickly. A few cousins sat near the back, faces tight with anticipation. I spotted my mother in the corner, sitting alone. My father was nowhere in sight. The clerk called the case. The judge, a wiry man with thin silver hair and a voice like sandpaper, looked up from the file. "All right," he said. "Let's get to it. Objection has been filed regarding the property transfer from the estate of Richard Abram Mercer to Mr. Evan James Mercer, counsel for the objectors. You may proceed." Robert's attorney stood and began what sounded like a carefully memorized monologue. "Your Honor, we contend that the decedent, Mr. Mercer, was not of sound mind at the time of amending his will. The addition of Mr. Evan Mercer as sole beneficiary of the primary residence represents a dramatic and uncharacteristic shift in prior arrangements." He went on, describing how Grandpa had supposedly promised the property would remain in the family line via Robert, who had taken care of the estate's maintenance for several years. Clara's name was mentioned repeatedly, as if repetition might convince the court she had ever belonged to the inheritance in question. Carla rose without missing a beat. "Your Honor," she began, her voice clear and restrained. "The defense submits into evidence notarized amendments to the will, a certified DNA test confirming direct bloodline relation between the decedent and Mr. Evan Mercer, and an official statement from Dr. Lillian Chow, Mr. Mercer's physician, attesting to his full mental clarity at the time of the will's revision." She handed over the folder and continued. "We also have written correspondence between the decedent and Ms. Cheryl Mackenzie, Mr. Mercer's biological mother, confirming lifelong involvement, including his intent to secure a rightful place for his biological grandson in his estate. Mr. Evan Mercer, while not formally adopted, is biologically and demonstrably the decedent's grandson." The will reflects that acknowledgement. The judge flipped through the folder silently, brow furrowed. Robert's attorney stood again, this time a little more aggressive. "The issue, Your Honor, is not whether Mr. Mercer believed Evan to be his grandson, but whether his decision to change the will mere months before his death was manipulated by emotional appeals. Mr. Evan Mercer lived in the home. He had access, influence." Carla stood again. "If presence equals manipulation, then the same could be said of every family member who spent time with Mr. Mercer, including the objectors. The decedent was a retired attorney himself. Your Honor, he understood the implications of a legal will." The judge looked up. "I'd like to hear from Mr. Mercer directly." My stomach dropped. I rose from my chair, walked forward, and stood before the bench. "Mr. Mercer," the judge said, "did you coerce your grandfather in any way to change his will?" "No, sir." "Did you expect the house to be given to you?" "No, sir." I said again. I didn't even know I wasn't their biological child until the day this will was read. A murmur stirred in the room. I kept going. For 27 years, I lived in a family that told me I was one thing while hiding another. I never asked for this. I didn't even feel like I belonged most of the time. My grandfather was the only person who saw me fully, and what he gave me wasn't just a house. He gave me the truth. I paused, voice tight. He didn't owe me anything, but he gave me everything. The judge nodded slowly. "That'll be all. Mr. Mercer." I returned to my seat. Carla gave my arm a small squeeze. The hearing wrapped within the hour. The judge didn't issue a ruling immediately. He said he would take the matter under advisement and render a decision within 5 business days. As we filed out, Robert brushed past me, muttering, "Don't get too comfortable." Clara just looked straight through me like I wasn't even there. Outside, the sky had cleared, for the first time in weeks. The light had warmth in it. Carla lit a cigarette and leaned against the stone wall of the courthouse steps. "You did good," she said. "I don't feel good." "That's not the point," she said. "Justice isn't a feeling. It's a fact." I nodded. That night, I sat alone in the house again. The hearing had left me drained, but not defeated. I walked through the hallways slowly, touching the wooden railings, the doorknobs, the window frames, all the places Grandpa must have once touched too. In his bedroom closet, I found a box I hadn't noticed before. Inside were dozens of letters. Most were addressed to Cheryl, but some were addressed to me, never sent. Letters for birthdays, for Christmases, for the first day of school, written in his blocky, precise handwriting. "Dear Evan, you got your first library card today. Your mom didn't notice, but I did. You signed your name so carefully, like it meant something. One day, I hope you know how much it does. Dear Evan, you fell off your bike but didn't cry. You looked up at me like you were trying to prove something. You don't have to. Son? Not with me. Dear Evan, they didn't come to your school play. I know you noticed. But you still clapped for everyone else. That's the kind of man you are, even when it hurts. I read every single one. Then I cried into my hands for so long I forgot the clock was ticking. 4 days later, the judge ruled. The will stands. Objection denied. Property rights remain with Mr. Evan Mercer. It was over. The house was mine. Not just legally, but openly, publicly, undeniably. I didn't throw a celebration. I didn't even call anyone. I just went out to the backyard, sat on the old wooden swing Grandpa had built, and let the wind carry through the trees. For once, I wasn't afraid of being seen, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid of being remembered. After the ruling came down, there was no explosion, no dramatic confrontation, just silence. Not the good kind, the kind that lingers in text messages left unread, in voicemails no one returns. My phone, once filled with half-hearted family group chats and birthday reminders, went dead cold. They didn't reach out again. Not Clara, not Robert, not even my parents. And I didn't chase after them. I think that's what shocked them most, that I didn't apologize for winning, that I didn't try to smooth it over, or offer to share, or pretend that I didn't care about what the house meant. But how could I pretend this place, its doors, its bones, its silence had raised me better than most people ever had? I spent the weeks after the hearing reclaiming the house slowly, room by room. I peeled off old wallpaper with my bare hands, tore up musty carpet to reveal hardwood floors beneath. I sanded the stair railing until it felt like skin, smooth and worn and real. I opened every drawer in every room and threw away anything that smelled like denial. It was my home now, and I needed it to feel like mine. I hired a painter named Moira to help redo the front rooms. She was older, in her 50s. With bright orange overalls and short gray hair she dyed blue at the roots. She didn't ask many questions, and I liked that about her. She just showed up every morning with a thermos of tea and worked in silence, sometimes humming to herself. On the 4th day, as we repainted the study a deep forest green, she finally asked, "You live here alone?" "Yeah." She nodded, kept rolling paint onto the wall. "It's a big house for one person, I guess." I said, "You ever think about selling it?" I looked up from where I was crouched, taping the window trim. Not once. Moira smiled, the corner of her mouth twitching like she already knew the answer. "This place has stories in it," she said. "You can feel it." I didn't say anything, but she was right. Some afternoons, I found myself standing in front of Grandpa's bookshelves, running my hand along the spines of legal texts and old war novels, half expecting to find another hidden letter, another secret. Most of the time, I didn't. But once, tucked behind a row of tax binders, I found a black and white photo of him holding a newborn me. His eyes weren't smiling in the picture, but his arms were gentle. He looked proud. One day, I opened a drawer in the study desk and found a cassette tape. It was labeled in faint handwriting. For Evan. I didn't even know the house had a cassette player until I found one in the basement, buried in a box of extension cords and Christmas lights. I cleaned it off, popped in the tape, and pressed play. There was a crackle of static. Then his voice. "Hey, kiddo. I don't know if you'll ever find this, but just in case this is me, your grandfather, telling you a few things I didn't know how to say out loud." I froze. The sound of his voice made the room feel smaller, closer. "You were always different," he continued. "Not because of where you came from, but because of what was inside you. You saw things deeper. You listened harder. You didn't talk much, but when you did, it mattered. A pause. I tried to protect you from the truth. At first, thought maybe if I kept things simple, life would be easier. But you were never meant for easy. You were meant for honest. Another pause, then a chuckle. Your parents, they did their best, but they were scared. Of love, of blood, of what it meant to have a son who didn't look like them. My throat tightened. I want you to know, he said, voice lower now. You weren't the secret. They were their fear, their silence. That's what needed hiding. The tape crackled, and I thought maybe it had ended. But then I love you, Evan, in ways that have nothing to do with names or papers. And if you ever feel lost in this world, come sit in this room. You'll find me here. Then silence. I rewound it and listened again, and again, until the words carved themselves into my bones. The next weekend, Cheryl came to visit. She stood at the threshold for a few seconds before stepping in, like she needed permission from the house. Her eyes scanned the hallway slowly, lingering on the stairs, the family portraits, the clock by the kitchen door. It's strange, she whispered, seeing where he lived, where you lived. I took her coat and hung it on the hook like I had watched Grandpa do 100 times. I wanted you to see it, I said, the way it is now. She nodded, then smiled. You changed the curtains. I hated the old ones. She laughed. He did too. I showed her around room by room. She stopped in front of a photo of me as a kid, standing on a tree stump in the backyard, hands on my hips like a superhero. He sent me this one, she said. Back then, I thought you looked fearless. I wasn't, I said, but I wanted to be. We ended up in the study. I played the tape for her. She listened without speaking, one hand over her mouth. When it ended, she wiped her eyes and said, he was right. You really do listen hard. We had tea in the sunroom. She told me about the library job she loved, the dog she rescued last winter, the way she still sometimes dreamed of a baby she never held long enough. I told her about law school, about feeling invisible, about the years of asking questions without knowing what I was even trying to find. When she left, she hugged me for a long time. I don't want to disrupt your life, she whispered. You're not a disruption, I said. You're a root I didn't know I had. That night, I sat on the porch, a blanket around my shoulders, and watched the sky shift from dusk to ink. The house felt full, not crowded, not haunted, just full. I thought about legacy, how it isn't about wealth or titles, but the quiet things, a letter in a drawer, a voice on a tape, a house built with room for the truth. I was no longer the quiet kid sitting in the back row, waiting for someone to call his name. I was Evan Mercer. I was claimed. There's something about living in a house that used to belong to someone you loved that never fully feels like ownership. It's more like stewardship, like the walls are waiting to see what kind of soul you'll be, now that they've let you in. By spring, the house had changed. Not dramatically, no renovations or flashy upgrades, but in subtler ways. The furniture had shifted slightly. The silence was no longer heavy. I had replaced the dusty family portraits in the upstairs hallway with framed photos of moments that felt like mine. A snapshot of Cheryl and me from her visit, laughing over mismatched teacups. A photo of Grandpa in his Navy uniform, younger than I'd ever known him. And one of myself, standing on the porch just after the hearing ended, no smile, no pose, just me, finally seen. I started working full-time again, this time for Carla's firm. She offered it quietly, over lunch one afternoon. You know the law, but more importantly, she said, You know what it means when people try to take things that don't belong to them. I accepted. It wasn't just a job. It was something that felt like building, not surviving. A way to hold space for others the way Carla had done for me. And then, one morning in May, I got a call from my mother. I let it go to voicemail. Then I listened to it twice. Evan. Her voice began. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I need to tell you something. I've been thinking. A lot. About everything. If there's even a small part of you that still wants to understand, please meet me. Just once. I almost deleted it. Then I called her back. We agreed to meet at a park halfway between her house and mine. Neutral ground. Public. But quiet. The kind of place where people walked dogs and pushed strollers and tried to stitch their lives back together one afternoon at a time. She was already sitting on a bench when I arrived, wearing sunglasses even though it was cloudy. She stood when she saw me, hesitated, then sat back down again. I took the spot beside her. We didn't speak right away. A toddler ran past, giggling, followed by a man pretending to be a monster. A dog barked in the distance, somewhere. A saxophone played softly through a Bluetooth speaker. I wanted to explain. She finally said, "I'm listening." I said. She took a breath. "When we brought you home, I thought it would fix something in us. Your father and I, we were struggling, quietly. We couldn't have children, and every time we tried to talk about it, we ended up hurting each other more." She stared at her hands, twisting the rings on her fingers. "Your grandfather came to us like he always did, decisive, commanding. He said, 'There's a boy. He's yours if you want him, but you need to pretend like he always was.'" I swallowed. "And you agreed. We were desperate," she said, "and ashamed. We didn't want anyone to know how broken we were, so we buried it, even from ourselves." I didn't say anything. "I never stopped loving you," she whispered. "But I was always afraid you'd leave if you found out. That you'd go looking for someone better. Someone real." "She's not better," I said. "She's just true." She nodded slowly. "I know." We sat in silence for a while. Birds flitted from tree to tree overhead. A jogger passed, headphones in. Oblivious. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said. "But I needed you to know I wasn't trying to erase you. I was just trying to survive. I know what that feels like," I said. She looked at me then. Really looked. Her eyes were older than I remembered. Softer too. Grief had carved lines into her face, but something else lived there now. Maybe humility. "I don't hate you," I added. "But I can't pretend this didn't change everything." She nodded. "It changed me too. When we said goodbye, she didn't ask if we could meet again. She didn't ask to come to the house. She didn't ask for anything. That, somehow, made it easier. A few weeks later, I got an envelope in the mail. Inside was a photo I'd never seen before me, maybe 3 years old, sitting between my parents on the front porch. They were both smiling, eyes squinting against the sun. I was holding a stuffed bear with a missing ear. On the back, she'd written, "We tried. Even when we failed, we tried." I placed it in a drawer. Not to forget, just to hold. Summer came. I started gardening. At first, it was just pulling weeds, trimming hedges, but soon I found myself digging rows, planting bulbs. I built a trellis by the back fence and trained ivy to climb it. Cheryl sent me packets of seeds in the male zinnias, cosmos, lavender. "I always wanted to be a gardener," she wrote in one note, "but I never had the space. Now I get to live it through you." Sometimes she visited, sometimes I visited her. We didn't make a ritual out of it. We let it be light, unrushed, unpromised. I told her about the cassette tape. and she asked if I could send her a copy. I did. She wrote back. He always had a better way with words than I did. I began sleeping with the windows open. Not because I was trying to remember him, but because I didn't need to forget anymore. And sometimes, on quiet nights, I'd sit in the study with the light off and the windows open, just listening. To the wind, to the creaks of the house, to the sound of my own breath, steady and unhidden. The neighbors started waving again, slowly, hesitantly. A few even asked if I'd be willing to speak at the neighborhood association meeting, just to say something. They said, "You're the last of the Mercers now." I smiled, but I didn't correct them. I wasn't the last. I was the one who stayed, who heard the silence, sat inside it, and didn't run. Now, when people ask me about the house, I tell them the truth, not the scandal, not the courtroom drama. Just this: it was given to me by someone who saw me before I saw myself. And sometimes they understand, sometimes they don't. But that's okay, because I do. And I think, maybe, that's enough.